if the feeling is difficult and it's leaden and it's heavy, the writing's not going to be any good. My name's Dominic Amarina. My debut novel is called I Want Everything. It's out with Summit Books and it's available at all good bookstores. Well, I'd say my book is a fun and funny literary mystery. It's about authenticity, it's about ambition, and it's kind of about our literary history and lineage, but with a plot. And there's a kind of quite a rollicking plot, I would hope. So I tried to make a book full of tension and intrigue, as well as being a book which is about ideas and our literary history. I have a narrator who's a young, he's not named, but he's a young, ambitious writer living in Melbourne, and he wants to become the next great Australian writer. But the only problem is he doesn't have anything to write about. So he's looking around for something which will make his name. And that something presents itself in the form of Brenda Shales, who's the other main character of my novel. And she is a cult author from the 70s who wrote these two incendiary, scandalous novels called The Widowers and Anchoress, which took the world by storm before she disappeared from the public eye in very mysterious circumstances. And nothing has been known of her for 50 years. And when my narrator stumbles upon her at the pool, he kind of sees the opportunity that he's been searching for a long time. So in a rather underhanded way, he worms his way into Brenda Shales' life and he learns the secrets of why she disappeared and what her novels meant. The other principal character in my novel is Ruth, who is the narrator's partner, and she is a writer as well, a much more successful writer than him, who he is jealous of, perhaps in a way he's not fully conscious of, and she also acts as a sort of moral arbiter to the narrator's moral undoing, shall we say. And so each of these kind of three principal characters, I think, represents a different aspect of writers and maybe what they represent. Like I would say Brenda represents this maybe romantic idea of the great writer who eschews public fame, whose work speaks for itself, who refuses the limelight, compared to my narrator, who's much more ambitious. He's maybe a bit more venal. He thinks more about his career as a writer than he does as the writing itself. And so I really kind of like try to play these ideas off against each other, which are symbolized through these two characters. It was a side plot in a much longer and more complex and much worse novel, if I'm being perfectly honest, which was doing my head in. And I found myself really enjoying this side plot of this ambitious writer and this kind of older cult author. And I was like, wow, I'm really enjoying this and I'm really not enjoying the rest of it. So I thought to myself, what would it be like if I just made this the novel? And I had a really great time writing it. And I think that sense of fun and excitement kind of transmitted through the page. And after I kind of realized that that's what the novel had to be about, it was quite fast and I managed to kind of like write it quite quickly. I also think that particular plot line it's influenced in a way by, I guess, Australia's literary lineage and history and its kind of relationship with scandals, hoaxes, and these ideas and this kind of obsession with authenticity and inauthenticity, which has been a real theme of Australian literary history. If you go back to the Ern Malley affair, which was when two young men tried to skewer modernist poetry by creating a fake modernist poet. And, you know, they took the literary world by storm. I actually think the poetry is quite good. They were trying to make a joke, but perhaps, you know, the joke was on themselves. But it's a very interesting kind of period of history, all the way through to, you know, John Hughes stealing Svetlana Alexievich's Nobel Prize winning book to write his book The Dogs. I think, you know, all through the 90s, you've got Helen Demidenko, you've got Norma Curry, you've got all the co-options of First Nations kind of writers like the Wanda Coolmetry scandal. Like, there are just all of these examples of fakery and inauthenticity that are scattered throughout kind of Australian literary history. And I was trying to think of a kind of fun and interesting way to maybe animate some of those ideas in my novel. And so I think that is where this idea of the young writer kind of taking the story of the older writer and the idea of a scandal and a hoax. I think it is very much in conversation with these parts of Australian literary history. It is my first novel. I have written other novels in the past, but unsuccessfully, I would say. But this is the first one where it felt really like a real novel. And I think that came from a lot of trial and error and like learning how to do it. And I feel like I can do it now. I've been published pretty widely, I would say, in the past 10 years where I've had periods where I was a regular literary critic for all of the newspapers and venues in Australia. I've won a lot of short story prizes. I've won a lot of fellowships for that kind of work. And I think that was a really kind of helpful period of my writing life to kind of learn how to try out different voices, different techniques, different kind of structures for storytelling. And I think all of that has really informed the novel. It's a really valuable thing to kind of start off by writing things that are a bit smaller, which are a bit more manageable. I've heard writing a novel being described as trying to assemble a chicken coop in a tornado, which I think is very accurate. Whereas I think shorter things you can kind of manage and you can like really refine your technique until you feel confident enough to try something a bit more complex. Well, since I got my book deal, I am, but I live in Athens actually, in Greece. So I have managed to find a way where I can live pretty cheaply and my money stretches further, but I do a lot of side work. I do freelance writing, I do corporate copywriting, I do a bunch of different things just to kind of make ends meet. But I'm lucky that I was able to live in a situation where my living expenses are quite low. So I can put writing at the center of my life, which is very lucky. It makes me feel very lucky. The one thing I really learnt from this novel is having an intuition about the feeling that the writing that you're doing is giving you. Like if the feeling is difficult and it's leaden and it's heavy, the writing's not going to be any good. And if it feels light and it feels fun and it feels exciting, the writing's much better. So now I've found, since I finished this novel, what I'm doing is, as much as anything, I'm searching for that feeling. I'm kind of creating the conditions where I can feel that excitement to sit down at my desk and begin work on the writing. And I really think that that feeling transmits itself to the reader. So that is what I'm looking for now in my writing. What is my favorite recipe when I'm cooking? Well, because I live in Greece, the main thing that I miss about Australia is Asian food. I miss it so much because, you know, I grew up in Geelong and then Melbourne, and I got so used to having the best Thai, Indonesian, like Vietnamese food, Chinese food, and I miss it so deeply. And so I've had to become a fantastic cook at home. So I'm now an absolute whiz at making all sorts of Vietnamese dishes, Thai dishes, Indonesian dishes, and I impress all of my Greek friends who've literally never tasted any of these flavor palettes before. So I'm very popular there. I think that's an interesting question. I think where the death knell of literature is always being sounded, and yet it is remarkably persistent. Like, I don't think the way that we read is markedly different to what it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Perhaps our attention spans aren't quite what they used to be, but I have a belief that people want to read and they always will read. And maybe the form or the media will slightly change, but I actually have faith that it will more or less be the same. And I think there's a kind of great comfort in that. There are a lot of books in the world, but I think that's good too. There's a plethora of kind of perspectives and ideas out there in the world. And I think that's very inspiring. I remember the first thing I really remember reading, which was, I can't remember the exact title, but Henry Sugar by Roald Dahl, which, you know, is about a kind of morally ambiguous figure who he invents a scheme to kind of become rich, and it doesn't work out for him. And it's quite funny. I was rereading it and I'm like, this is sort of like the plot of my novel. So perhaps there is something there that's been ticking around in the back of my head for a long time. I have a very wide, diverse range of authors that I love. I think I'm often drawn to kind of like post-colonial literature, like Kurt Sayer, Doris Lessing. Um, Here in Australia, like the character of Brenda Shales is very, very much informed by a lot of the writers whose work has inspired me throughout the years. So when I was kind of envisaging what books she might have written, I was often thinking of, for instance, books like The Well by Elizabeth Jolley, this kind of very dark, very kind of strange, but very kind of compelling novel. And I was like, oh, this is the kind of novel that I think Brenda Shales, the character that I wrote, might have written. Equally, Helen Garner is a writer whose voice is something that I always find myself drawn to and was a big inspiration for the way that Brenda Shales talked in the novel. And then writers like Janet Frame as well, whose kind of short work is like some of my favorite I've ever read, but also, what's it called? Faces in the Water, that kind of novel about her time living in an asylum in New Zealand. And I think this generation of writers has been really, really influential on my kind of work. And it was really nice in my novel to kind of, in a sense, pay homage to a lot of these writers. I'm on book tour at the moment, which is quite surreal and quite fabulous. I'm off to Brisbane and Sydney next week and then back for a couple of events in Melbourne and Geelong and the surrounding area. I'm from Geelong originally. I'm enjoying it because it's a good way to distract myself from kind of thinking about how the book is doing. Also to distract myself from thinking about the next book, which I have a lot of great ideas for, but I am petrified of beginning again because the last one took me so long, and I'm kidding myself and I'm telling myself the next one's going to take me 6 months, maybe a year at the most. So I'm looking forward to never puncturing that delusion by starting it. So I think once I get back to Greece, I will get stuck into it again because I do have a novel and I'm feeling the energy building. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much for having me.